Hello everyone. Today we are going to discuss with you the book analysis of the novel entitled And Then There Were None by Agatha Christie. Here are the contents of our presentation. First is the author's background, the characters, the summary of the story, the writing style, themes and symbolism, critical approach, and last, the moral of the story. So let us discuss first the author's background. Agatha Christie was a British crime novelist and playwright who is considered one of the most successful and prolific writers in the history of literature. She wrote more than 60 crime novels, including The Murder of Roger Ackroyd, The Murder on the Orient Express, and Death on the Nile, as well as numerous short stories and plays. Agatha Christie wrote And Then There Were None in 1939, and it is considered one of her most famous and successful novels. She wrote And Then There Were None as a way to challenge herself and her readers, creating a complex and suspenseful story that kept readers guessing until the very end. She was known for her meticulous plotting and attention to detail, and Then There Were None is a prime example of her skill as a crime novelist.
Now, let's move on to the characters. There are 10 characters in the story. The first one is Thomas Rogers. The mansion on Indian Island has a butler named Rogers, who also looks after the land. In order to save his former employer's life, he and his wife concealed a crucial drug from them. Next one is Vera Clayton. In order to work as Mrs. Yu and Owen's secretary, Vera, a former nursemaid, arrived to the island. She lost her boyfriend as a result of the drowning death of a small child she was responsible for. Next one is Philip Lombard. Lombard is a fortunate soldier. He is accountable for the deaths of a 21 native African tribe. Next is Judge Lawrence Wargrave. He is charged with the murder of Edward Seton, a guy whose case he presided over according to the gramophone. Next is Dr. Edward George Armstrong. He is charged with killing a patient after operating on her while drunk. She is tricked into cooperating with the murderer's plan, and the murderer then uses a red herring to kill him by pushing him down a cliff on the island. William Henry Bloor. Bloor worked as a detective with Scotland Yard before he lied, putting an innocent guy behind bars. A marble clock in the future of a bear strikes him in the head, and it kills him. Next one is Ethel Rogers. Mrs. Rogers is the butler's wife and the housekeeper. The gramophone tape accuses her of participating in the murder of her former employer. Next one is General John Gordon MacArthur. A former World War I general named MacArthur is charged with killing a man with whom his wife is having an affair by sending him into a battle. When the general arrives on the island, he immediately feels a feeling of imminent disaster. He suffers a severe head injury and passes away. Next one is Emily Brent. She was a religious true believer, and she considered herself to be morally superior to everyone else on the island. She is charged of murdering a little child by pushing her to kill herself after being expelled from her home. An injection of cyanide in her neck leads Miss Brent to die. Last one is Anthony Marston. Marston is a young, handsome, rich playboy. He is a dangerous driver and accused of killing a young people with his car. Cyanide is put in his drinking glass and he chokes to death after drinking.
Now, the summary of the story. A group of 8 strangers are invited to Indian Island, which lies off the coast of England. Former governess Vera Clayton believes she has been recruited as a secretary. Adventurers Philip Lombard and William Blore believe they had been hired to keep an eye out for problems over the week, and Dr. Armstrong believes she has been recruited to care for the wife of the island's owner. Judge Wargrave, Tony Marston, Emily Brent, and General MacArthur believe they are going to see old acquaintances. The butler and housekeeper, Mr. and Mrs. Rogers, welcome the visitors to the island and inform them that the host, whom they refer to as Mr. Owen, won't be there until the following day. After a delicious meal that night, everyone congregates in the sitting room where they are all overheard a recorded voice accusing each of them of a specific crime that was done in the past but was never discovered. They exchange email and discover that nobody, not even the maids, is familiar with Mr. Owen, which implies that they were sent here in accordance with a peculiar plan by someone. Tony Marston accidentally ingests poison whiskey and suffocates as they are debating what to do. The group retires to their bed out of fear, where practically everyone is tormented by guilt and flashbacks of their crimes. Vera Clayton recognizes the connection between Marston's death and the first line of the children's rhyme, 10 Little Injuns, which is displayed in each bedroom. The visitors discover Mrs. Rogers dead in her sleep the next morning. The boat that usually transports supplies to the island does not arrive, which prevents the visitor from departing that morning. Blore, Lombard, and Armstrong resolve to explore the island for the mysterious Mr. Owen after concluding that the death must have been murders, but they don't come across anyone. General MacArthur, the oldest visitor, travels to stare at the water since he believes he is going to die in the meanwhile. Dr. Armstrong discovered the general's dead from a head injury before lunch. The other visitors gather to talk about their problem. They come to the conclusion that one of them is the murderer. Judge Wargrave tells them that the evidence now available implies any of them may be the murderer despite the many broad allegations they make. Everyone locks their door before going to bed after a restless afternoon and dinner. The following morning, they discover Rogers dead after he was murdered while cutting wood for breakfast. The visitors are certain at this point that the killings are being committed in accordance with the nursery rhyme. They also noticed that the dining room table used to have 10 Indian figurines, but that one of them had vanished with each death. Emily Brent sits alone at the table for a bit after breakfast because she feels little dizzy. Soon after, her body is discovered with a poison injection in her neck. Wargrave now conducts a systematic examination of each person's belongings, securing any weapons that could be there. The remaining visitors discuss among themselves but also giving each other cautious glances as they sit together. When Vera finally decides to take a bath, she is frightened by a piece of seaweed that is hanging from the ceiling and cries. Blore, Lombard, and Armstrong hurry to assist her, but when they get back downstairs, they discover Wargrave dressed in a curtain that resemble courtroom robes and bearing a red mark on his forehead. Armstrong examines the body and reports that Wargrave has been shot in the head. The following evening, Blore hears footsteps in the hallway, but when he goes to investigate, he discovers that Armstrong is not in his room. Armstrong is nowhere to be found throughout Blore and Lombard searches of the home and the island. Another Indian figurine is missing from the table, which they find out after searching for it. Vera, Lombard, and Blore step outdoors and make the decision to remain on the safety of the open land. Blore makes the decision to return home and acquire some food. The other two discover that Blore was killed as he approached the home when a statue was pushed out of the window on the second floor. A drowned body and Armstrong is discovered on the beach as Vera and Lombard retreat to the shore. Vera steals Lombard's gun and kills him after becoming certain that he is a murderer. Happy to have made it through, she goes back to her room to relax. She discovers a noose waiting for her in her room, but when she hangs herself out, some strange urge to play out the rhyme's final line. Police are stumped by the case until a manuscript in a bottle is discovered. The late Judge Wargrave wrote the document outlining his motivation for planning the killings, which has not get revenge on the individuals whose crimes are not punished by law. Wargrave is open about his own desire for blood and enjoyment of seeing the wicked punished. Wargrave chose to die in a blaze rather than let his life fade away after discovering he was dying from a doctor. He talks about the process he used to eliminate Marston, Mr. and Mrs. Rogers, MacArthur, and Emily Brent. After that, Wargrave explains how he tricked Dr. Armstrong into helping him arrange his own demise by making a promise to meet by the cliffs to discuss a plan. When Armstrong came, Wargrave pushed him over the side into the water before going back to the home and faking death. He might have killed the remaining visitors without raising their suspicions thanks to this disguise. Wargrave had intended to kill himself so that his body would fall into the bed as thought it had been put there once Vera had hung herself using a rope he had made for her. Consequently, he anticipated that the police would discover 10 dead bodies on a private island. So that is the summary of the novel.
Now, let's move on to the writing style of the author. So, Agatha Christie wrote And Then They Were None is in a style that is typical of her mystery novels. The story is told from multiple perspectives, with each chapter told from the point of view of a different character. The narrative is suspenseful and engaging, with a tight focus on the central mystery of the killer's identity. Christie uses a range of literary techniques, such as foreshadowing and red herrings, to keep the reader guessing and to build tension throughout the story. So, when we say foreshadowing, it is a literary technique in which an author hints or clues the reader into events or developments that will occur later in the story. In Agatha Christie's mystery novel, And Then They Were None, foreshadowing is used to build suspense and keep the reader guessing about the identity of the killer and the motivation behind the murders. So, one example of foreshadowing in the novel occurs early on when the character Mr. Justice Wargrave mentions the nursery rhyme 10 Little Soldiers, which the character later discover has been altered to reflect the number of murders that had been committed on the island. This foreshadows that the killer is using the rhyme as a guide, and also suggests that the killer is someone who is familiar with the rhyme and its significance. Another example of foreshadowing Agatha Christie employs elements of Gothic genre, such as remote, isolated setting of the island and the presence of supernatural elements, such as figurines of the Little Indians. Overall, Christie writing style in And Then They Were None is effective in creating a sense of mystery and intrigue, and in keeping the reader engaged until the novel's shocking conclusions. Now, let's move on to the themes, including guilt, murder, and justice. Now, let's first tackle the theme of guilt. The theme of guilt is central to the plot of Agatha Christie mystery novel. Many of the characters in the novel are there because of the crimes they have committed or events they have been involved in. And their sense of guilt is a driving force behind their actions and decisions. One example of the theme of guilt in the novel is the character of Vera Clayton. Vera Clayton is haunted by death of a young boy in her care. He is racked and with guilt over the over the boy's death, and is tormented by the thought that she could have prevented it. This guilt drives her to try to atone for her actions and ultimately leads her to the tragic decision. Okay, the next theme in the novel is the theme of justice. The theme of justice is a central and complex issue. The novel follows a group of people who are invited to an island only to find that they are being systematically murdered one by one. As the story unfolds, it becomes clear that each of the characters has a dark past and has committed some kind of wrongdoing. At the heart of the novel's theme of justice is the idea that all of the characters are being punished for their crimes, even if they were not formally charged or convicted in a court of law. This is exemplified through the use of the nursery rhyme "10 Little Soldiers" as a framing device with with each verse representing the death of a character. As the characters are killed off, they are confronted with their own guilt and the ways in which their actions have caused harm to others. The novel also explores the idea that justice can be subjective and that different people may have different definitions of what constitutes justice. This is seen in the character of Vera Clayton, who is initially portrayed as a victim but later reveals that she played a role in the death of a young boy. Vera's actions are driven by a belief that she was acting in the best interest of the boy and his family, but others may view her action as unjust. Overall, the theme of justice in the novel suggests that justice is a complex and multi-faced concept that can be difficult to define and apply in practice. It also suggests that people's action can have far-reaching consequences, even if they do not face formal punishment for their wrongdoing. The next theme is the theme of murder. The theme of murder is a central and pervasive present throughout the story. The novel follows a group of people who are invited to an island off to the coast of England, only to find that they are being systematically murdered one by one. The theme of murder is used to create a sense of tension and suspense as the characters try to figure out who is behind the killings and how to stop them. The theme of murder is also used to explore the idea of justice and the consequences of wrongdoing. Each of the characters has a dark past and has committed some kind of wrongdoing, and they are ultimately punished for their crimes through the murders that take place on the island. The theme of murder is also used to examine the motivations behind violent acts and the way that people can be driven to commit them. The novel suggests that people may be driven to commit murder by a variety of factors, including greed, jealousy, and a desire for power and control. Overall, the theme of murder in the novel serves to create a sense of unease and danger throughout the story and to explore the complex and multifaceted nature of crime and punishment. Also, there are symbolism used in the novel. In Agatha Christie mystery novel, there are a number of symbols that are used to present various themes and ideas. One of the most prominent symbols in the novel is the nursery rhyme 10 Little Soldiers, which is altered to reflect the number of murders that have been committed on the island. These rhymes serve as a symbol for the characters' sense of isolation and their ability to escape the island, as well as the idea of justice being meted away according to the predetermined plan. Another symbol in the novel is the island itself, which represent the characters' sense of isolation and their inability to escape the events that are unfolding. The island also serves as a symbol for the characters' inability to escape their past, as many of them are there because of the crimes they have committed or events they had been involved in. So, the use of symbols in And Then They Were None adds depth and complexity to the novel. It helps to illustrate the themes of isolations, justice, and the consequence of one's action. Now let's move on to the critical approach used in the story. First one is psychological approach. A psychoanalytic approach to analyzing the novel would involve examining the unconscious desire, conflicts, and motivations of the characters. This approach views human behavior as driven by unconscious mental processes such as repressed emotions and unresolved conflicts from the past. In a psychoanalytic analysis of a story, the character's action and decision might be interpreted as expression of their unconscious feelings and conflicts. For example, a psychoanalytic analysis of the character of Vera Clayton might focus on her feelings of guilt and self-blame for the drowning of the young boy in her care. These unconscious emotions might manifest in her behavior throughout the story, such as seeming lack of concern for her own safety and her willingness to sacrifice herself for the sake of others. Another example might be the way in which the character of Dr. Armstrong's feelings of inadequacy and fear of failure, stemming from his role in a fast surgical mistake, contribute to his actions and decisions on the island. These unconscious conflicts might manifest in his reluctance to take decisive action and his tendency to defer to others. Additionally, the psychological approach is used to reveal the motivations of the killer, which is Mr. Wargrave. Wargrave is a retired judge with a strong sense of justice, and he sees the murders on the island as a way to punish those who have escaped punishment through legal hope. This motivation is revealed through the Wargrave's own thoughts and actions and helps to create a sense of logic and purpose behind the murders. So overall, the psychological approach in And Then They Were None is used to create complex and nuanced characters, as well as to build suspense and tension throughout the plot.
So now, for the moral of the story, crime does not pay and justice will prevail. So it is basically mean that punishment is what will eventually come to someone if he continues a life of crime. So, of course, is it possible that somebody will get away with crime for a while? Yeah, definitely. But it means that if he continues this life of crime, sooner or later, he is going to get caught. Sooner or later, his luck is going to run out and he might get some more serious punishment, and it's very difficult to get out of that vicious cycle of crime. So it's better to live a law-abiding life and choose to do the right thing all the time. So that's the end of our presentation. I hope you learned something. Thank you very much.